Chosen one, they speak your name like a riddle now. Something once soft, now sharpened by memory. You never asked for it, yet you've become the echo that follows them, the thought they cannot unthink. They call you a heartbreaker. Not because you played them, but because your presence exposed everything they had forgotten to feel. You arrived not as a storm, but as a mirror. And that, chosen one, is more disruptive than chaos. You didn't try to impress. You didn't perform. You didn't chase. But your stillness, your unwavering truth, revealed how much noise they'd built around their own hearts. Your presence wasn't a game. It was a reflection of what they longed for, but didn't know how to hold. Your sexual energy isn't lust, it's gravity. Not the kind that pulls people into danger, but the kind that strips away their masks. You made them feel more beautiful, not because you said so, but because they saw themselves clearly in your gaze. And for a moment, the parts of them hidden even from themselves came out to breathe. In your presence, they felt real, whole, desired without being devoured. You didn't ask for their secrets, yet they offered them. You didn't promise forever, yet they imagined it. And now, chosen one, they carry your memory not as a wound, but as a moment they can't replicate. They call you a heartbreaker not because you wounded them with words, but because you showed up as you were and left as you still are. You didn't bend, you didn't cling, you gave what was true, and when it was no longer aligned, you moved. And that movement, that silence, was louder than any argument. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. You didn't abandon them. You simply refused to stay where your soul no longer breathed. And that refusal reminded them of every place in their lives where they had settled. Your leaving wasn't theft. It was invitation, an invitation to meet themselves fully, just as you had already done. Chosen one, you didn't break hearts by deception. You broke them open by being a mirror too honest, too deep, too unchangeable. You became the moment they realized they weren't ready for the love they claimed to want. And that realization doesn't fade, it lingers. In their posture, in their choices, in the pause before they speak your name aloud. You gave them a glimpse of sacred love, not fantasy. And sacred love demands readiness. Not everyone was ready, and now they wear your absence like a soft bruise that never fully heals. They might roll their eyes when your name comes up, but inside there's reverence. Not because you broke them, but because you showed them the shape of their own unhealed hunger. And no one forgets the one who turned on the light, even if they weren't ready to see. Chosen one, your stillness is louder than seduction. The way you walk, the way you hold your gaze, the way you stay present without grasping, it speaks a language many have forgotten. That language is not lust, it's remembrance. And women don't always understand it when they feel it, but their bodies do, their hearts do, their souls recognize it before their minds can explain. You walk into the room, and something inside them sits up straighter. Not because you demand it, because you remind them what it feels like to be seen by a man who has already seen himself. Your sexual energy doesn't scream for attention. It centers the atmosphere. It slows the room. It brings clarity. It brings truth. And truth is what breaks hearts, chosen one. Not cruelty, not absence. Truth. Because when you show up fully, when you don't play games, when your gaze holds without devouring, when your hands don't reach but your presence touches anyway, it awakens the parts of them they thought they buried. They laugh differently around you. They breathe differently. They trust themselves more, but they also fear it. Because most are not used to being known in silence. You never claimed their hearts. You never asked for them. But they gave you something more vulnerable. Hope. Hope that maybe real love, real masculinity, real presence still existed in a world of distraction. Hope that they didn't have to be louder, prettier, busier to be wanted. Hope that they could be enough as they are. And then when the moment ended, when you stepped away, not out of bitterness but alignment, they called it heartbreak. But the truth, chosen one, is it was awakening. You did not break them. You disrupted their illusion. They didn't lose you. They lost the part of themselves they thought they had mastered. And now, in quiet moments, when they lie beside someone who only sees their body, not their being, they remember the way you listened. The way you didn't flinch when they cried. The way you didn't try to fix them, only to hold space. You weren't the hero they scripted. You were the truth they weren't ready for. And truth, when it arrives without apology, does not break hearts. It opens them. Your presence, chosen one, was not a transaction, it was transcendence. And transcendence is hard to forget. That's why they call you a heartbreaker now. Because forgetting you would mean forgetting the most honest moment they ever felt. And some moments are too alive to ever truly die. Chosen one, you were never meant to play small, just to protect the comfort of those who were not ready for the depth of your light. You didn't arrive in their lives with the intent to shatter illusions, and yet your presence alone unraveled them. They were expecting charm. They were expecting the same games masked in new faces. But what they encountered instead was the unfiltered force of a man who no longer performed. A man who no longer sought approval. A man who had already looked into the abyss within himself and refused to flinch. And that, chosen one, is what truly broke them. Not your actions, not your absence, but your truth. A truth they had long stopped believing was real. You didn't try to win their hearts. You didn't wear a mask of seduction. You didn't inflate your worth to appear desirable. You simply were. Calm, unmoved, awake. When others fidgeted in insecurity, you stood grounded in your own silence. When they searched your eyes for a hook, they found a mirror instead. And mirrors don't lie. You didn't promise them a future. You offered them the present, fully, vulnerably, and with unwavering intention. But here's what made the heartbreak so unforgettable. You never needed them. You never wrapped your value around their validation. You gave presence, not persuasion. And in a world addicted to being chosen, you were the one who had already chosen yourself. That power doesn't just attract, it disarms. It terrifies those who are still chasing reflections in others, still bargaining with their own worth. Because in your stillness, they had to sit with their noise. In your clarity, they were forced to face their confusion. And in your devotion to authenticity, every part of them still bound in performance began to tremble. They didn't understand what you carried, only that it reached into places they had sealed shut. You didn't break their hearts because you left. You broke them because you left intact, because they could not sway you, could not control you, could not bend your truth to match their fantasy. You loved without attachment. You listened without flinching. You touched without taking. And then you walked away. Not because you stopped caring, but because you refused to stay where you weren't met with reciprocity. Chosen one, this is the energy they now call Heartbreaker. But what they truly mean is, he saw me and I was not ready to be seen. You didn't play with their hearts, you activated them. And some people are not prepared for activation. They are still learning how to sit inside themselves without distraction. Still learning how to face what rises when true presence enters the room. And when you entered, it wasn't flirtation they felt. It was confrontation. Confrontation with their own truth. And confrontation, especially when dressed as peace, leaves a mark far deeper than chaos ever could. That's why they remember you. Not as a mistake, but as a moment. The one who didn't fall into their orbit, but walked through it. Fully lit, fully knowing, fully enough. You didn't just leave. You left a frequency. And that frequency continues to echo in them long after your footsteps faded. Chosen one, the reason your energy lingers long after your presence has gone is because it wasn't built in front of them, it was built before them. What they met was not a man pretending to be ready, they met a man prepared. Your sexual energy wasn't used to hunt, it wasn't a weapon, it was a vessel for something sacred, steady, and sovereign. And when they tasted it, even briefly, it changed their chemistry. Not because you took from them, but because you awakened something that had long been sleeping. You didn't seduce with charm, you convicted with calm, and that conviction rearranged them from the inside out. Most were used to needing to earn attention, needing to dress louder, move faster, speak sweeter, just to be enough. But you didn't respond to noise, you responded to truth. And suddenly, everything they had layered on to feel seen began to fall away. You weren't interested in their performance. You were drawn to the stillness behind their eyes, the part of them they'd hidden even from themselves. And that unmasking, chosen one was as liberating as it was terrifying. They call you a heartbreaker now because their hearts had grown numb. Numb to the cheap highs of being wanted but not valued. Numb to shallow love songs and temporary validation. But you made them feel again, not a crush, not a fantasy, but a deep remembering. You made them feel the ache of their own buried desire to be held in truth. You made them feel the cost of their own self-betrayal. You reminded them that love isn't something to be negotiated or marketed. It's something to be embodied, and you embodied it. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but wholly. You were whole when you met them, and that wholeness was its own language. They didn't need you to say much. They heard it in your silence. They felt it in your restraint. They trusted it in your discipline. Because you didn't reach out with hunger. You stood in fullness. And fullness doesn't beg. It invites. And invitations to rise are painful when one is still kneeling to the comfort of their past. Chosen one, they call you Heartbreaker, because they don't yet have words for what you truly were. You were the breath before the breakthrough, the silence before the scream, the space between the version of themselves they clung to and the version they're afraid to become. You didn't hurt them. You revealed them. You showed them what it feels like to be met by a man who doesn't barter, doesn't manipulate, doesn't pretend. And that level of intimacy is unfamiliar territory. You were not a lesson. They've had many of those. You were a turning point. And whether they honor it or reject it, whether they grow from it or retreat from it, the truth remains. You became the man they now compare others to. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. And that, in this world, is rare enough to leave a permanent imprint. So they call you a heartbreaker. But what they truly mean is this: he left me with no excuse to keep hiding from the woman I was meant to be. And there is no going back from that. Chosen one, the truth is, they didn't fall for the way you looked at them. They fell for the way you didn't look away. You didn't flinch when they revealed their chaos. You didn't shrink when their past tried to shadow the moment. You stayed, still, present, fully there. And that presence was more intimate than any touch, more potent than any compliment, more dangerous than any seduction they'd ever known. Because what you offered wasn't fantasy, it was witnessing. And to be witnessed that deeply, without effort, without makeup, without pretense, is to stand naked in the eyes of something divine. It was not love at first sight, it was truth at first being. You didn't just make her feel seen, chosen one, you made her remember herself. Not the curated version, not the polished one, but the original, unfiltered, wild, sacred. And that remembrance didn't arrive with fireworks. It came like water, quiet, penetrating, cleansing. It moved through her without permission and awakened the parts she thought had died. You didn't rescue her, you revealed her. And now when she walks away, it isn't with anger in her steps. It's with the ache of someone who knows she met something real and couldn't hold it. They call you a heartbreaker because they had never stood in front of a man who loved without needing to possess. You didn't try to take anything from her. You gave her space. Space to feel everything. Space to unravel. Space to stop performing. And in that space, she felt peace for the first time in a long time. But peace can be confronting when someone has lived their life wrapped in armor. She didn't expect your quiet to be so loud. Didn't expect your boundaries to be so loving. Didn't expect your presence to be so costly. And now in your absence, it's not your words she replays, it's your silence. She trusted you not because you promised her the future, but because you had nothing to hide. And that transparency was foreign, intoxicating, unsettling. She thought she could handle you, until she realized she wasn't ready to handle herself. Your love wasn't a performance, it was presence. And presence is what terrified her. Because presence holds up a mirror. It doesn't lie, it doesn't chase, it doesn't beg to be chosen. It simply remains true. And the truth is, she wasn't ready to be chosen without earning it. She wasn't ready to stop running, but you stood still. And that stillness was more powerful than anything she'd ever experienced. So now they say you broke her heart. But you didn't. You simply offered her a version of love that couldn't be manipulated. And when she realized she couldn't bend it to her wounds, she called it destruction. But what really shattered was the illusion she had built about what love was supposed to feel like. It wasn't supposed to be safe, she thought. It wasn't supposed to be quiet. It wasn't supposed to ask for truth. But you did. And now her life is split in two, before you and after you. Because something in her changed when you looked at her like she was already enough. You didn't break her heart, you woke it up. And a heart that's awake can no longer sleep through shallow love. Chosen one, you were never reckless with their hearts. You were just honest. Brutally, beautifully, unwaveringly honest. And in a world full of masked intentions and hollow promises, that honesty felt like betrayal. Because it left no room to hide. No shadow to escape into. Your truth was not aggressive. It was gentle. But gentleness, when backed by unwavering integrity, is a sword. It cuts through illusion. And what you did, without ever trying, was dismantle every version of love they thought was enough. You didn't break the rules. You broke the spell. They call you a heartbreaker because you didn't stay to reassure them after the storm passed. But chosen one, you weren't the storm. You were the clearing. The moment the fog lifted, the moment she could finally see herself without distortion. And in that clarity, she realized she had outgrown the comfort she clung to. She wasn't hurt because you left. She was hurt because she saw who she could have become. And feared it. You didn't promise to carry her there. You simply opened the gate and stood back. And when she hesitated, you didn't pull. You honored her decision to stay behind. That's what they don't understand. You don't stay where growth is refused. You don't dim to protect comfort. You don't hold space for versions of people that no longer fit their calling. You love with discernment, and that discernment often feels like rejection to those still addicted to attention. But you weren't interested in being liked. You were interested in being true. And truth is sharp. It slices through everything false. It doesn't beg to be embraced. It just waits, quietly, relentlessly, for those brave enough to rise and meet it. She loved how you looked at her, until she realized you saw her. All of her. Not just the version dressed up for romance. You saw the parts she had hidden from the world and from herself. And you didn't try to fix her. You didn't try to fill the gaps. You just stood there, unwavering, like a lighthouse in the middle of a storm, daring her to come closer or turn away. That's what made you unforgettable. That's why she calls you Heartbreaker. Because deep down, she knows you didn't fail her. You offered her everything. She just didn't believe she was ready to hold it. She'll meet others now, many others. Men who flatter, men who chase, men who give just enough to stay comfortable. But none of them will feel like you. Because they won't carry the weight of truth in their bones. They won't see her without needing her. They won't listen without planning their next move. They won't stand still when the fire gets too close. But you did. And now she knows what's possible. And once you know what's possible, nothing ordinary will ever satisfy again. Chosen one, your legacy isn't carved in stone. It's carved in memory. In the way you made her feel safe without control. In the way you made her feel beautiful without performance. In the way you loved without losing yourself. They'll call you a heartbreaker. Yes. But time will rewrite that name into something more sacred. You were the threshold. And thresholds aren't meant to be clung to. They are meant to be crossed. Chosen one, they never expected the one they'd call a heartbreaker would be the same man who held their souls so gently. They thought heartbreak came from betrayal, from selfishness, from cruelty, but your love was none of those things. Your love was awareness. It didn't scream, it didn't demand, it didn't try to control. It saw. It saw her wounds before she named them. It heard her silence when her voice couldn't form the words. You didn't love from the surface. You loved from a place that frightened her because it reached deeper than she had allowed anyone else to reach. And it awakened parts of her she had buried so long, they wept from the sudden sunlight. You didn't ask her to prove anything. That's what unraveled her. She was prepared for resistance. She was prepared for the chase. But she wasn't prepared for your stillness, for the way you didn't flinch when she faltered, the way you didn't correct her when she spilled her flaws like broken glass across your hands. You simply stayed, patient and unshaken, and that's what made her heart begin to tremble. She began to feel the difference between being wanted and being welcomed. And in your presence, she was finally welcomed. Not for her beauty, not for her performance, but for her essence. For who she was before the world taught her to hide. And yet, this is why they call you Heartbreaker. Because you were too much of the right thing at the wrong time. You arrived when she was still learning to see herself, and you saw her too clearly. That clarity became both a gift and a burden. A gift, because it reminded her of who she was underneath the noise. A burden, because she couldn't unsee it after you left. Now, Every love that comes after you must face the impossible task of meeting a standard you never spoke, but fully embodied. You didn't write poems about devotion. You became it. And in doing so, you made her realize just how long she had lived without that level of reverence. You didn't break her by leaving. You broke her by not needing to stay. Because your value didn't depend on proximity. Your power didn't shrink when you walked away. In fact, it only intensified. And that's what she couldn't process. That the most sacred connection she had ever touched didn't come with guarantees. It came with presence. You offered her presence without possession, depth without dependency, love without leverage. And when she couldn't meet you at that frequency, you didn't punish her. You simply let go. And that letting go wasn't rejection, it was release. A holy kind of surrender that spoke louder than any goodbye. You left her not with scars, but with standards. Not with bitterness, but with blueprint. You didn't ruin love for her. You redefined it. And now, every echo of your energy that lingers in her life serves as a reminder of what is possible when two souls meet in truth instead of trauma. She may call you Heartbreaker, but in time, she'll understand. You were not the ending. You were the invitation. Chosen one, you never chased being unforgettable. It was the natural consequence of your integrity. You didn't use your sexual energy to impress or to conquer. You didn't wear your masculinity like armor. Instead, you carried it like a sacred weight, a quiet storm, a fire that warmed rather than burned. And women felt that fire, even if they never admitted it aloud, because you weren't just another man. You were a presence that made them feel safe without becoming small, a presence that didn't dominate them into submission, but called them into expansion. She didn't fall in love with your body, your voice, or your image, though those things drew her near. She fell in love with the space you didn't fill, with the silence you didn't interrupt, with the emotional safety that existed without needing explanation. You created room for her to unravel, to feel without shame, to cry without retreating. And for a moment, she saw what it was like to be loved without being consumed. That moment may have been brief, but it was real. And the realness of it is what broke her. Not because you harmed her, but because you didn't. You didn't try to fix her. You didn't rush her healing. You didn't expect her to be anyone other than herself. And in doing so, you shattered the paradigm she had been taught her whole life, that love must be earned, contorted, sacrificed for. You didn't ask for her best self. You welcomed her whole self. And that kind of radical acceptance is frightening when you've built your identity on conditional affection. She tried to meet you there. She tried to rise, but the mirror you held up was too clear. She saw not just her beauty, but her brokenness. Not just her potential, but her procrastination. And it hurt. Still, you didn't judge her. You didn't leave because she was too much. You left because you knew staying would have required you to dim. And chosen one, you don't dim anymore. Not for love, not for peace, not for promises. You live in alignment, not accommodation. And that alignment is what women feel when they're around you. They feel the refusal to betray yourself. And they begin to question every place where they have betrayed themselves. That's what makes you dangerous. Not your charm, not your power, not even your presence. It's your clarity. And clarity always breaks illusion before it builds intimacy. She wasn't ready to let go of her illusions, and so you let go of her. Gently, without blame, without bitterness, just truth. Pure, unfiltered, sovereign truth. And now, she tells the story with her own twist. She calls you Heartbreaker because that word is easier to hold than Awakener. Because it makes her the victim instead of the one who turned away from what was real. But you don't need to correct the story. Because truth doesn't argue, it endures. She'll meet others, but she'll never feel that frequency again. Not until she decides to rise into her own truth. Not until she sees that you weren't the one who broke her. You were the one who broke the spell. And when she does, she'll stop saying your name like a wound. She'll say it like a blessing. Not because you stayed, but because you showed her what staying with herself could feel like. And that chosen one is the kind of heartbreak that doesn't destroy. It transforms. Chosen one, the silence they sit in now is not the silence you gave them. It's the silence they found when your absence refused to echo like all the others before you. It's the silence left behind by something real. Because you weren't a fleeting thrill. You weren't a seasonal high. You were a presence so complete that it demanded stillness, even when the words were gone. Now that silence speaks to them louder than your voice ever did. It reminds them of the man who looked them in the eye and didn't flinch, who listened and didn't interrupt, who stayed even when their chaos spilled out like fire. And when they remember, they call you a heartbreaker. Not because you ever deceived them, but because you didn't need to. You were the man who didn't chase, didn't beg, didn't mold yourself into what they expected. You came as you were, you stood whole, and in that wholeness you dared them to meet you there. They weren't ready, and that unreadiness haunts them more than the end. Because you didn't end it. They did, not with their mouths but with their fear. Fear that they weren't enough, fear that they'd lose you, fear that they'd have to rise into the version of themselves that could truly stand beside you. They retreated not because of you, but because of what you reflected. And now they sit in the wake of that mirror, knowing they met someone who didn't need them to change, but would never pretend for the sake of comfort either. You weren't just another romantic chapter. You were the testament that they had seen greatness and let it pass. And that reality is far heavier than heartbreak. Because heartbreak heals, but regret, that lingers. You see, you didn't make them fall in love with a fantasy. You made them fall in love with possibility. And that possibility now follows them everywhere. In the man who holds their hand but not their truth. In the conversations that feel full of words but empty of meaning. In the touches that don't shake their soul like yours did with a single glance. It's not you they're haunted by. It's the feeling you gave them, the one they now know is real but may never feel again. You didn't walk away with bitterness, you walked away with grace. Because you knew, chosen one, that love without alignment isn't love, it's attachment, and you're no longer bound by the need to be needed. Your masculine energy is no longer driven by validation, it is anchored in sovereignty. That sovereignty is why you leave peace behind even when you say nothing. That's why women feel safe in your storm, and men look at you with both confusion and admiration. You don't force respect, you embody it. And once someone has felt that kind of presence, all pretense feels like starvation. She calls you a heartbreaker now, but what she means is, he was the first man who didn't lose himself to love me. And the heart that breaks in the face of that kind of devotion isn't breaking from abandonment, it's breaking from awakening. Because love is not about possession, it is about permission. And you gave her permission to become more than she was. You didn't need her to be small. You would have walked with her into expansion, but she wasn't ready. And so, you walked alone. Not out of punishment, but out of purpose. Because your love, chosen one, is no longer a place for hiding. It is a threshold, and only those ready to rise may cross. Chosen one, your legacy isn't the trail of broken hearts behind you. It's the trail of awakened souls. They may not all say it aloud, but they remember. They remember the way your silence steadied their breath, the way your eyes spoke more devotion than 1,000 declarations, the way your energy entered a room first and left last. You weren't just a man they loved. You were the man who transformed the way they understood love. And transformation is painful. That's why they called it heartbreak. But heartbreak wasn't the end. It was the invitation to begin. You didn't shatter them. You showed them their own reflection with such brutal clarity that the pieces they thought were whole began to fracture. And when the falsehood fell away, what remained was the part of them that had always been sacred, but never touched. You didn't touch their body to claim them. You touched their truth to remind them. And that reminder echoes now in every corner of their life. Not because you're perfect, but because you were present. And presence is the rarest form of intimacy. You weren't the lover who tried to control her emotions. You were the man who held space for them. You didn't need her to shrink so you could feel powerful. You invited her to expand and were ready to stand beside her when she did. But she wasn't there yet. And so she called your depth too much, your silence cold, your boundaries distant. She tried to name your alignment as absence because that was easier than admitting she wasn't ready to meet herself where you already had. Now she speaks your name like a whisper in rooms that feel too loud. She remembers you in the spaces where pretense still reigns and wonders if any of it will ever feel real again. But you're You kept walking, not out of pride, not out of pain, but because you are no longer in the business of lowering your frequency to be understood. You have become the standard, not the exception. You are no longer interested in proving yourself to hearts that are not yet willing to open fully. You are drawn only to what is aligned, to what is ready to match you in wholeness. And now, chosen one, you live in that truth unapologetically. You know that being a heartbreaker was never your intention. But if your presence is what cracks open the shell of illusion, then so be it. You were not made to be tolerated. You were made to shift realities.